I was sacrificed to the wolf god, but instead of killing me, he laid his head in my lap. The village of Aylthorn had known fear for as long as the gray mists had curled around its hills. Every season, whispers of the wolf god rose from the forest beyond, carried by the wind like distant drums. Mothers hushed their children at night, speaking of the beast whose eyes could pierce through walls and hearts alike. Yet no story terrified the villagers more than the tale of the sacrificial tribute, the one the wolf god would claim in exchange for mercy upon their lands. Alara stood at the edge of the cliff above the sacred forest, the cold wind tangling her hair around her face. Her hands were bound, but she barely noticed. Her mind roamed through the years of preparation, the chants and the endless prayers. She had been chosen by lot, a tradition older than memory, to become the next offering. Fear was there, yes, but beneath it lay a strange calm, like a river that ran quiet under ice. Alara thought of her mother's last words before the villagers had led her here. Face him with your heart open. Fear may bow to courage if it finds it true. She did not know how courage could touch a god, but she clung to the idea as tightly as a lifeline. The forest below was alive with shadows, each tree whispering secrets of ancient power. The wolf god's den was not a cave, as many imagined, but a hollow formed by the roots of a massive, gnarled oak. Its trunk was blackened, scarred by centuries of storms, and at its base lay a bed of moss that glowed faintly under the moonlight. Alara's footsteps crunched over fallen leaves as she descended, her heartbeat keeping time with her pulse of fear and anticipation. Then she saw him. The wolf god emerged from the shadows, his coat a dark swirl of midnight and silver. His eyes were amber fire, ancient and endless, and they studied her with a depth that stole the breath from her lungs. He was enormous, larger than any wolf she had ever seen, and yet his movements were quiet, deliberate, as though the forest itself bent around him in respect. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Alara's throat felt dry, but her legs carried her forward as if guided by some unseen force. When she finally reached the center of the clearing, the wolf god lowered his head, the amber gaze never leaving hers. The villagers had expected screams, the tearing of flesh, the swift claim of a mortal life by an immortal deity. But instead, he did something no one had imagined. He knelt before her and his massive head rested gently in her lap. Alara froze. Her hands trembled as she stroked the fur along his muzzle, the texture both soft and powerful, like silk woven with steel. His breath was warm, rumbling against her hands, and she realized she could feel the thrum of his heartbeat, not human, not exactly godly, but something in between. "You are alive," she whispered. The wolf god's lips moved, but no sound came. Then deep inside her mind, a voice echoed, low and rough like gravel sliding down a mountainside. "I did not come to end you, yet I cannot release you. Not yet." Alara's heart pounded. The villagers had spoken of wrath, of punishment, of an ending. Instead, here was a god who was curious about her, studying her as if she were a story yet to be told. "Why me?" she asked, though the words trembled. "Why do I live when others?" The wolf god lifted his head slightly, amber eyes locking with hers. "Because you are not just a mortal to be fed upon. There is something in you that calls to me, a thread of courage or perhaps sorrow, I do not yet know." Alara swallowed hard. The forest seemed to lean closer as if listening. She felt a strange warmth in her chest, a fragile hope that this encounter, terrifying as it was not the end she had expected. But there was danger here, unspoken and real. Every moment the wolf god stayed with her was a choice. He could crush her with the sweep of a paw, with a thought, with a flicker of his divine will, and yet he did not. "Are you kind?" she asked, the question sounding ridiculous even as it left her lips. The god's gaze softened in a way that startled her. "Kindness is not mine to give freely, but I am not the destroyer you fear, not entirely." Alara's fingers traced the line of his jaw. The warmth of life beneath the fur reminded her that even gods could bear loneliness. That perhaps, even in this creature of legend and terror, there was a longing she recognized in herself, the yearning to be seen, to be understood. "You are lonely," she said, more a statement than a question. The wolf god's head tilted slightly. The voice in her mind rumbled again, quieter this time, like distant thunder. "Lonely, yes. But what is loneliness to one who is eternal? What is fear to one who has been worshipped and shunned in equal measure?" Elara understood then. She was not just a mortal in danger. She was a witness, perhaps even a companion in a solitude that stretched across centuries. The forest was still. Only the wind dared move, stirring leaves as if in hesitant applause. Elara's thoughts wandered to her life before this moment, the home she had known, the streets of the village, the laughter of her younger siblings. She realized she had never felt truly free, not until this strange communion with the god who could end her life with a blink. I will not run," she said finally, finding strength in her own words. "I will not fear you." The wolf god's amber gaze held her, piercing yet contemplative. "Then perhaps there is hope for both of us." That hope, fragile as a spider's web, trembled in the cool night air. Elara felt the weight of destiny settle upon her shoulders. Whatever path lay ahead, it would not be one of simple survival. She and this god, this creature of shadow and fire, were now bound together, though neither knew the measure of the bond. The god rose, his body towering, muscles rippling beneath the fur like living shadow. Elara took a step back instinctively, yet he lowered his head to meet hers again, as though bridging the vast gulf between mortal and deity. "You belong to me now," he said, the words resonating like echoes through the forest. "Yet I am neither your master nor your savior. Our fates are entwined, fragile as they may be." Elara nodded, unsure what it truly meant, yet feeling the truth of it deep in her bones. She understood fear and she understood the weight of being chosen. But she also understood, perhaps for the first time, that life could be transformed by mercy, even from a god. The first night in the god's presence stretched endlessly. Elara could not sleep, nor did she want to. The forest seemed alive, watching, waiting, as if the trees themselves knew that a bond was forming that could change everything. Every breath the god took, every shift of his massive body, echoed through her own heart, teaching her patience, understanding, and something else, a quiet, almost unbearable longing. Dawn approached like a slow promise. The mists of the forest curled around them, and the first rays of sunlight glinted off the god's fur, revealing patterns of silver and shadow she had not seen in the moonlight. He was magnificent, terrifying, and achingly lonely, and in that moment Elara understood the enormity of her choice, to live in fear or to live in connection, no matter the cost. Before the sun fully rose, the wolf god spoke again, low and soft, but carrying the weight of centuries. "Rest now, little one. We begin a journey that neither of us can yet name. But know this, the world will watch and perhaps tremble, but I will not let harm come to you, unless it is by your own choosing." Elara placed her hand upon his head, and for a moment the wind stilled, the forest hushed, and the world felt suspended between night and day. A bond had been formed, fragile yet unbreakable. She felt the pulse of the god's life beneath her fingers, and with it, a strange courage blossomed in her chest. For the first time in her life, she did not fear what came next. And yet, even as the first light of dawn touched the treetops, a shadow moved at the edge of the clearing, a silent reminder that the world outside the sacred forest would not wait. Danger, envy, and human fear would come for her. The wolf god could protect her, but only so far. Beyond that, Elara's courage, her choices, and her heart would decide her fate. And somewhere deep in the amber eyes of the god who had spared her life, there lay a question unspoken, as heavy as the night itself. Can a mortal teach an immortal how to hope? The answer waited, hidden in the path that neither of them yet knew how to walk. The forest had become a world of its own. Mist lingered among the twisted trunks, and the songs of hidden birds echoed through the hollowed oaks. Alara had spent the first few days learning the rhythm of life beside the wolf god, Kale, as she had come to know his name in whispers and mental echoes. Every movement he made seemed guided by purpose, every glance heavy with unspoken thought. At first, the weight of her survival pressed on her chest. She had been chosen as a sacrifice, and yet here she was, alive. She felt both relief and guilt. The villagers had given her to the god, and she had survived. That alone should have made her grateful, but Alara could not feel simple gratitude. There was something unsettling in the way Kale watched her, as though he were searching her soul for truths she did not yet know herself. The days were filled with quiet lessons. Kale taught her to move without disturbing the forest, to listen to the language of the wind and the whisper of the roots. Each lesson was a test, subtle but exacting. Alara felt herself growing stronger, not in muscle but in awareness. She was learning to exist in a space where mortality and divinity brushed against one another. But the evenings were the hardest. That was when the god's loneliness revealed itself. Kale would lie with his head in her lap, the same way he had the first night, and for hours neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, full of memories that were not hers yet seemed to press upon her chest. "You remember everything," she said one evening softly, "don't you?" Kale's amber eyes glimmered. "Everything is remembered, every touch, every glance, every fear. Time does not heal a god's heart as it might a human one." Alara stroked his fur, marveling at the paradox of softness and power. "Then you've been lonely for centuries." "Lonely, yes. But it is not a simple thing. Loneliness is different when you live beyond the years of men. You grow tired of waiting. You grow tired of hope. And yet when it comes, hope can feel unbearable." Alara frowned, sensing the depth of his suffering. "Can a god even need companionship?" she asked, almost afraid of the answer. "Need, perhaps. Desire, always. But desire is dangerous. It binds, it burns, it destroys. Mortals cannot fathom the weight of such longing." Her fingers lingered against his muzzle. She wanted to ask more, to reach into the spaces between his words, but fear stayed her. This was a god, not a man, and she was still learning the rules of this strange, shadowed world. Over time, Alara noticed subtle changes in herself. Her heart began to respond to his presence in ways she had never experienced. The quiet moments, the shared silences, the unspoken understanding, all of it left her breathless. She felt fear, yes, but also an ache of longing she could not name. One morning, as dawn brushed pale light across the treetops, Alara awoke to find Kale gone. Panic rose like a tide. The forest felt too still, the shadows too deep. She called his name, voice trembling, but only silence answered. Then a rustle behind her. Kale stepped from the trees, his eyes softer than usual, yet shadowed by something unspoken. "You must learn to face what you fear," he said, low and deliberate. "The forest is not always safe. Neither am I." Alara's throat tightened. "I am not afraid of you." "Perhaps not," he murmured, "but you are still mortal. There are those who would harm you, who fear the power I hold." It was true. Alara had sensed a presence near the edge of the forest, hunters, or worse, men who did not understand what the wolf god truly represented. They were drawn by fear, by superstition, by greed, and she realized with a cold certainty that her life was no longer her own. Days passed, and the tension grew. Alara could not help but watch him as he moved through the forest, majestic and terrifying. She felt both awe and sorrow. Kale carried the weight of centuries in his every motion, yet he allowed her to walk beside him, to learn, to speak. That trust was precious, but also dangerous. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, they came to a ruined temple. Its stones were cracked, vines curling like serpents along its walls. This had once been a place of worship, long before human kings and queens had carved their names into history. The air was thick with magic, heavy and old. Kale lowered himself to lie beside the altar. His amber eyes, reflecting the dying light, found hers. "There are memories here," he said, "echoes of who I once was before anger claimed me, before loneliness became my companion." Alara knelt beside him, tracing the edges of the broken stone. "Then perhaps you can be more than what the past made you. Perhaps there is a way to change." "Perhaps," he said, but the word carried a weight heavy as a mountain. "Change is not easy. Redemption is not a gift. It is a burden, and often it comes at a price no mortal should bear." She met his gaze. "Then we will bear it together." For a moment, time seemed suspended. The forest, the temple, the dying sun, they all faded. There was only the two of them, bound by something that was not fear, not duty, but a fragile thread of understanding and longing. But the quiet did not last. A howl rose from the edge of the forest, sharp and human in its fury. Alara stiffened. Kale's ears flicked, his body tense. "They are here," he said. "Those who would challenge the bond between mortal and God. You must be careful." Before she could respond, figures emerged from the trees. Hunters, armed and determined, their faces masks of fear and anger. "The beast must be slain," one shouted. "The girl is theirs no longer." Alara's heart raced. She wanted to run, to hide, but Kale's presence beside her grounded her. His body moved like liquid shadow, placing himself between her and the intruders. His growl shook the stones of the ruined temple, low and resonant, warning them back. "You will not harm her," Kale's voice echoed, both in the forest and inside their minds. "Not while I breathe." The humans faltered, fear washing over them as the god's power pressed against their hearts. Alara realized then that Kale's presence was not just force. It was a will that could bend the world itself. And yet, even as she marveled, a thought struck her like lightning. What if this bond brought danger upon her instead? What if being with him made her a target, not a survivor? Kale's eyes softened, catching the tremor in her gaze. "Do not fear me. Fear what the world will do if you stand alone." The hunters retreated, unwilling to challenge the god whose anger could tear forests apart. Alara exhaled, relief washing through her. She realized how deeply she had come to rely on his protection, and with that reliance came a new awareness. Her feelings were no longer simple admiration. They were complicated, filled with desire, longing, and fear, all tangled together. That night, she could not sleep. Kale lay beside her, his head resting on her lap as he had the first night, and she traced patterns in his fur absent-mindedly. The warmth of his body against hers was both comforting and confusing. "You fear the world," he said softly, "and yet you stay. You risk much by being near me." "Why?" Alara's fingers paused. "Because I feel alive with you," she admitted. "I feel seen. I do not understand it, but I cannot leave it behind." "Mortals are fragile," Kale murmured, amber eyes intense. "And yet you carry courage that amazes even me. Do you know what this means? You are no longer merely a witness to my existence. You are part of it in ways you cannot yet comprehend." Her heart thumped. She did not move, afraid that her voice or touch would break the fragile moment. Instead, she let her fingers rest against his fur, letting silence speak. The bond between them deepened with each passing day, subtle and undeniable. Alara's heart, once bound by fear and duty, now pulsed with longing. Kale, despite his centuries, found something unexpected in her presence, hope, fragile but insistent. And yet, the world beyond the forest did not wait. Shadows of jealousy, fear, and superstition lingered at the edges, reminding them that their bond was both a gift and a danger. One night, as they sat beneath the stars, Kale spoke in a voice almost too soft to hear. "There are those who would see us torn apart. They do not understand the heart of a god, nor the courage of a mortal. Soon, we may be forced to choose between survival and trust, between fear and love. Are you ready for that, little one?" Alara met his gaze, steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I will not leave you," she whispered. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The wind stirred, and a distant howl answered her words. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the trials yet to come. In that moment they were not god and mortal, not predator and prey. They were companions, bound by understanding, trust, and a growing, unspoken love. But even as they held this fragile peace, a shadow moved in the distance. Someone was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Elara shivered, knowing that the journey ahead would test not only their courage, but the depth of the bond they had forged in silence and shadow. And in Kale's amber eyes, she saw the question that had first brought them together, still unanswered. Can a mortal teach an immortal how to hope, and can a god teach a mortal how to endure? The answer, like the stars above, remained hidden, waiting for the night when courage would meet destiny. The forest seemed quieter than usual, as if it, too, waited for what was coming. Mist curled around the gnarled roots of the ancient oaks, hiding paths that had once been clear, and shadows moved like whispers across the ground. Elara and Kale had walked these woods countless times, yet today the forest felt unfamiliar, heavy with anticipation. Kale's amber eyes reflected the gray sky above. He moved with careful precision, every step deliberate, yet his body carried tension that even the forest seemed to notice. Elara walked beside him, heart pounding. She had known fear, had faced mortal danger before, but this was different. Today, they faced not simple mortals or hunters, but the consequences of ancient curses, of magic older than kingdoms, of the weight of gods themselves. "You feel it too," she said softly, her fingers brushing against his fur. "The air, it's different." Kale's gaze met hers, steady and unwavering. "Yes, the threads of magic here are taut, the curse grows stronger, and the choice we must make is near." Elara swallowed. She had come to understand that Kale's immortality, his godhood, was tied to the fate of the forest, and perhaps the entire kingdom. The curse that bound him had not been mere legend. It was real, and it hung like a shadow over both their lives. To break it would cost something precious. "What must we do?" she asked, voice trembling despite her courage. "There are two paths," Kale replied, amber eyes deep with sorrow. "One would release me from this curse but bind me to mortality. The other would leave me as I am, eternal and powerful, but the world would suffer the balance lost. The choice is yours as much as it is mine." Elara felt her chest tighten. She had never imagined that love, if it could even be called that, would carry such weight. Yet she understood. The bond they shared had grown beyond curiosity or companionship. It had become trust, and with trust came responsibility. We do this together," she said, taking his massive paw in her hands. "Whatever comes, we face it side by side." Kale lowered his head, letting her fingers trace the contours of his face. "Your courage humbles even a god." The journey took them to the heart of the forest, where the oldest trees grew in a circle, their roots intertwined like the fingers of ancient hands. In the center stood a stone altar, weathered and cracked, inscribed with runes that pulsed faintly with magical energy. This was the place of reckoning, the crossroads of choice and destiny. Kale approached the altar, every movement careful, aware of the latent power that hummed beneath the stones. Elara followed, feeling a mixture of awe and fear. She knew that whatever happened here would change them both forever. "Place your hand upon the stone," Kale instructed, his voice low, carrying both command and reassurance. "The magic will test us. It will look into your heart. You must be willing to face your own fears as well as mine." Elara nodded, heart hammering. She laid her hands on the cold stone, feeling the pulse of magic beneath her fingers. It was alive, ancient, and demanding. Images flitted through her mind, visions of the past, of lost kingdoms, of the centuries Kale had endured, of lives touched and broken by the curse. Kale lowered his head beside her. "Do not turn away. Trust yourself. Trust us." A shiver ran down her spine. The air thickened, the forest itself seeming to lean closer, whispering in languages older than she could understand. Her courage wavered, but she clung to Kale's presence, to the warmth and trust she had come to know. Then came the moment of choice. The magic of the altar surged, wrapping them in light and shadow. Kale's form shimmered, shifting between wolf and human, between God and something fragile. His amber eyes met hers, holding centuries of sorrow and longing. "Elara, I cannot do this alone. You must guide me." She swallowed, voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. I trust you, Kale, and I believe in us. Whatever happens, we face it together." With that, she pressed her palm firmly against the stone. Energy coursed through her, hot and heavy, yet not painful. She felt Kale's presence shift beside her, felt the centuries of his loneliness and anger, and realized that her love, her courage, and her willingness to face the unknown were the key to breaking the curse. A blinding light surrounded them, and for a heartbeat the world disappeared. Elara felt herself lifted, weightless, as if floating between time and eternity. Kale's roar of release echoed in her mind, not of anger but of liberation, of letting go. When the light faded, Kale lay on the stone beside her, not as a god, not as a wolf, but as a mortal man. His chest rose and fell with the fragile rhythm of human breath. Elara's hands trembled as she reached for him. "Kale," she whispered. His amber eyes, now human in their warmth, opened slowly. "Elara," he breathed, voice raw and new. "It is over." Tears rose to her eyes. She could feel the enormity of what had happened. The curse was broken, and yet he had given up the thing that had made him immortal to do it. They had both been transformed, not by magic alone, but by trust, courage, and love. He smiled faintly, a gesture both fragile and powerful. "I am yours now, not as a god, but as a man." Elara pressed her forehead to his. "And I am yours," she said, feeling the truth of it settle deep in her chest. "Not as a mortal to a god, but as a human to someone I love." The forest seemed to breathe with them, leaves rustling in quiet applause. Birds sang tentatively in the distance, and the wind carried the scent of pine and earth. The magic of the forest, once heavy and oppressive, now felt alive, joyful, and free. But the world beyond the forest had not forgotten them. Rumors of the wolf god's demise had spread to distant kingdoms. Humans, fearful of the unknown, would soon come seeking answers, perhaps vengeance. Yet for the first time, Elara and Kale faced the world together, not as predator and prey, not as god and mortal, but as equals bound by trust, courage, and love. Kale stood, testing his legs, still unfamiliar with human frailty. He extended his hand to Elara. She took it, and together they stepped from the altar, leaving the ruins behind. The sun, rising slowly over the horizon, painted the forest in gold and silver light. "You will need time," Kale said softly, "to learn, to walk as a man, to understand what it means to be fragile." Elara smiled, brushing her fingers against his. "And you will need to learn what it means to trust someone fully, but we will do it together." They walked through the forest, each step a declaration of the new life they had chosen. Elara felt her heart open in ways she had never known possible, and Kale, mortal now, felt the weight of emotion he had never before experienced. Love, longing, hope, and the fragile, terrifying joy of being human. Days passed, and they learned the rhythms of life anew. Kale marveled at the small joys, a sunrise without the weight of eternity pressing on him, a songbird's flight, the warmth of a fire against his skin. Elara discovered strength within herself, guiding Kale as much as he had guided her. Their bond, tested by fear and forged in shared struggle, deepened into something rare and luminous. Yet, even in this fragile peace, a memory lingered. The howl of the forest, distant yet haunting, reminded them that some ancient forces never fully vanished. Elara felt the pull of destiny, understanding that their journey was far from complete. But now they faced it together, not as god and mortal, but as partners, bound by choice, courage, and love. One evening, beneath a sky painted with stars, Kale took Elara's hands in his. "Do you remember the first night?" he asked, amber eyes now fully human, glowing with warmth. Elara nodded, smiling softly. "I remember. You laid your head in my lap, and I felt something I did not understand at the time." Kale chuckled softly. I did not know then either. I only knew I could not bear to lose you, and now here we are, not as I once was, but as we are meant to be. Alara leaned her forehead to his, feeling the beat of his mortal heart. And we will face what comes next, together. Kale pressed his lips gently to her forehead, a gesture both protective and tender. Together, he repeated, a promise and a vow. The forest whispered around them, leaves shimmering in the silver light of the moon. Somewhere far away, a distant howl answered, not of danger but of recognition. They were no longer bound by curse or fear. They were free, and in that freedom they had found each other. Alara realized that love, courage, and trust could transform even the heaviest shadows. And Kale, once a god alone for centuries, now understood the fragile power of human connection, the gift of hope, of shared life, and of the endless possibilities that come when hearts are brave enough to open. As the night deepened, they walked through the forest, hand in hand, hearts beating in quiet harmony. The journey ahead would have its challenges, but they were no longer defined by fear or destiny. They were defined by choice, by courage, and by the bond they had forged in shadow, fear, and love. And somewhere in the distant mountains, a faint howl carried through the night, a reminder that the world still held magic, mystery, and trials to face. But for now, beneath the ancient trees and the watching stars, Alara and Kale walked together, mortal and once god, bound by the timeless power of hope and love. The forest exhaled, the wind carried their laughter, and the first light of dawn promised a future built not on fear, but on trust, courage, and the quiet, enduring strength of hearts that dared to love.